there's a problem, yes. All right, so I'm going to roll. Video's rolling, audio in 3.
You and I are just having a nice time, and Richard's stressing out.
No, I'm fine.
That's what it's all about. Yeah.
This is real radio.
This is radio.
That's radio when you got to figure out where the problem is, and then you get it fixed and you feel really good. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
I hear him before I see him. His voice booms from the recording studio down the hall. He's laughing a deep, genuine chuckle. And I know that voice. Where have I heard the voice before? Then I see him in the doorway. He fills the frame of the door, all 6'2" inches of him. He's got a cowboy hat pushed back, just so on his forehead. In my imagination, recalling this first sighting of my special guest today, he's got a belt buckle and cowboy boots on, but I don't know if that's true or not. In my mind, he does. He's Big Jim Williams, legendary broadcaster and writer, and lives here in Santa Barbara, California. Big Jim has flourished in print, online, in audiobooks, and in radio dramas on NPR. He is a lifelong broadcaster. Since 1949, a former Voice of America news stringer, a film narrator, a retired public information officer, Army Signal Corps veteran and television productions, and a writer of crime, humor, and suspense magazine ghost stories. His radio drama, Close Encounters of the Confederate Kind, produced by San Francisco's Shoestring Radio Theater, aired on over 100 NPR stations. Big Jim did morning radio at KDB in Santa Barbara for 10 years. From 1959, what was that? Would that be 1959 to 69? Right? I got misprint here. Before joining SB, that's Santa Barbara City College. And 10 years before that, he was in Ventura at KVVC and KUDU radio. Big Jim Williams loves Old West history, its historic sites, and the courageous pioneers who had the guts to wagon-train west in frontier America. He is the author of Jake Silverhorn, Texas Ranger series. He has published by DS Productions featuring his novels, Border Justice, Texas Justice, Seeking Justice, and the 2022 release, Gallows Justice. These are all available on Amazon and more. Cattle Drive, Jim's initial Western book, won the Western Fictioneer's 2014 Best First Novel Award. Wow, congratulations. I've been fascinated by Jim's voice for nearly a decade, maybe longer. Feels like it's always been there, coming through my radio speakers in my car, all times of the day. But I'd never met the man. So today, together, we all get to meet legendary broadcaster and writer, Big Jim Williams. Welcome, Big Jim.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yes, it's nice to have you across from me. I don't mind talking about, you'd say radio, Dr. D sitting off to my right here. Jim's across from me. And we're at the console. We're really close here, all together in a little broadcasting room where we love to be.
Yes, we love it.
Agree,
yeah,
we love to be here.
Yeah.
And but we started the broadcast, and one of the microphones went out. I love to talk about what happens behind the scenes for the listeners, because I'm such a student or a fan of radio. When things would go wrong, and I would hear them on air and with different hosts, different radio programs that I listen to, it was always, to me, that was the most, it's exciting. I could feel the adrenaline. I could feel the anxiety. Something was going on. Something was wrong. A tape didn't play correctly or something like that. Well, the mic wasn't working. My mic wasn't working, which is probably a good sign, or probably someone was sending me a sign.
The only thing worse is when you think your mic is dead. and you start telling stories about your boss on the air. Yeah, that's the only thing that's worse.
That could be a lot worse. I could see
And that's happened to almost all of us. Yes.
Has happened to you, Dr.
All
D?
microphones are always alive. Yeah.
No, that was the lesson.
We've all learned the hard way. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So the microphone went out, and Jim and I just getting to know each other and across the console here, and Richard's working so hard on figuring out how to get the mic back hot and live. And you said something that I thought was interesting, just to start off the talk here with you, Jim, that both of you looked at each other and said, "That's radio. That's real radio." Why is that?
Well, it's simply because it's the technical things that go wrong today are actually usually a little minor compared to what they used to be a long time ago, because you had the technology today is just absolutely amazing, like the camera that's on me that is about the size of a package of cigarettes. And in the old days, when I first worked in television in 1953 and 54, the cameras were about the size of a refrigerator, with an image orthicon tube that cost $1,200. Now you can buy a camera like this for just a few $100s. Mm-hmm. It's amazing, the technology. But and all the transmitters we had, the transmitters were as big as a house. Now they're tiny, especially if you have an FM signal. It's just, the technology today is amazing with satellite radio, AM radio, FM radio, studio transmitter links, whatever it may be. It's just the technology today is it is mind-blowing. Yeah.
So much. It's opened up such a bigger world to broadcasters like myself, and reaching the world. Reaching small little towns and in Africa or
through streaming,
Ukraine, through streaming and podcasts and things like that. Ukraine has been my number 2 most listened to audience since we started,
which
is
fantastic.
I don't know anybody in Ukraine, but they're out there and they're listening. So it's just incredible. I agree with you, the technology. Well, you grew up in a small town down the coast a little bit here next to us. One of my favorite spots to get away to, Ojai, California.
Correct, yeah.
During the last days of the Great Depression, we've all read, I think, Grapes of Wrath in school. What was the Great Depression like? What were your memories of that time? And
my folks came out of the Midwest around that time, about 1922, 1924, and I was raised in the Ojai Valley, as you point out. I have 3 older brothers. They're all gone now, unfortunately, and I'm the youngest of 4. And but I was raised there in a small town where you could get on your bicycle and ride around town all day long, and everybody knew you. And I'll tell you one thing. If you got in trouble on the south side of town, by the time you got home, your mom knew about it. It was that kind of a small town atmosphere. And not much really in Ojai has changed that much over the years, too, since I left there. Graduated from high school in 1950 and happened to be the class president. I won by 1 vote, by the way. I want you to know. When we had the elections, there were only 52 people in our class. And so when they had the elections, I thought, well, I'm going to be a generous person. I'm going to vote for the other person, and I learned a lesson in life. So I voted for the other person. And when we started counting the ballots with 52 students, we ended up with 50%. So it was self-defeating. And so we did a second ballot, and this time I voted for me and I won by 1 vote.
So what is the lesson in life there?
The lesson in life is vote for yourself.
Vote for yourself. Yeah. Take care of yourself first.
Be nice. Yeah. Be nice to the loser, I guess, is it? Yeah. Anyway, that was and I started working in radio when I was still in high school, a senior, and had an opportunity to do a boys club radio show in Santa Paula, which is a few miles away. And I grabbed it. I wanted to work on radio. I loved radio. I'd been singing on radio, as a matter of fact, on one of the stations in Ventura, where eventually I ended up working. But on one of their amateur shows, I started singing down there, won the first week, lost the second week, but I was on twice, singing some songs, and that was fun. And later on, I did a lot of amateur musicals too. That was fun. But So I got into radio with the idea in mind of doing drama, writing dramas, and performing as a narrator or actor. That's really what I wanted to do. But in the late 1940s, early 50s, television was coming along, and television literally clobbered radio at that time.
Okay.
And it was but I still wanted to work in radio and did, but finally had the opportunity to do a radio drama and wrote one. It was produced, as you mentioned in the opening, in San Francisco, and then bicycled on about 100 NPR stations across the United States, a thing called Close Encounters of the Confederate Kind. And it was a drama, sort of like Escape, Suspense, that type of thing. It was fun to do. Someday I'd like to do some more of them too. Yeah, fun, yeah.
Well, that was one of my questions about television, radio. So I looked up, I was thinking, I'm a student of film originally, and I wanted to look at film, radio, and television, and kind of how they work parallel with
Right.
each other, and those mediums, how they took over, entertainment and news and everything else, and how they reached people in America and around the world. So I was looking this up, and on December 28th, 1895, the world's first commercial movie screening takes place at the Grand Cafe in Paris by the Lumiere brothers. They had developed a camera projector. And then next comes radio. So under this call sign KDKA, Pittsburgh's Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company transmitted the first scheduled broadcast on November 2nd, 1920. The first television system broadcast was a straight line by Philo Farnsworth on September 7th, 1927. You became Jim, Big Jim or Jim? How do you like?
I was Jim at that time, yeah.
Jim, you became a broadcaster, you're talking about in 1949. And at that time, I've seen, documentaries and things like that, and the radio, and pictures of families just gathered around the radio.
They did.
And there were, what you mentioned, what you wanted to do is create entertainment and stories and produce them, put them out on the radio. How much at that point, when you went into broadcasting, was radio still the primary place, the primary medium that daily, nightly, that families, where they would get their news, where they'd get their entertainment? Or at that point was television?
Radio
Where was
was
it at?
still
Where were the
radio
two
was
at?
still king, but it was changing rapidly because when television first came along in the very late 40s, 1940s, here was a raster, as they call it, that appears on your screen. It's just like turning on a computer, and maybe you don't have a picture on it, but you've got the whole screen lighting up. And as soon as they started putting pictures on those television screens, people started watching anything, anytime.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when television first started, it was limited in its hours. Maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon it would come on, stay on to maybe 10 o'clock at night. And then gradually those hours expanded. And but radio was king with the dramas. We had Escape, Suspense. I'm talking about radio dramas, Lux Radio Theater. Then we had all kinds of comedy shows, Jack Benny, Fred Allen. And eventually most of those shows transferred over or transitioned onto television as time went by into the early 50s.
Wow.
Take a program like Dragnet that started out in radio, and Jack Webb was writing and producing those and starring on them. And eventually they transitioned into television, yeah. But it took, didn't take any kind of a picture that was on the screen. People were watching it. It was like Hopalong Cassidy, the old B Western movies with William Boyd. They were all over the tube in the early days of television, and the man made a fortune off of them, as a matter of fact. More power to him. But it was a changing period. And also during that time of radio, we were, if you had a program you wanted to record, transcribe, and keep it and replay it, we had to cut take a disc that was 16 inches across, a flat disc with an aluminum center or glass center, had an acetate kind of a top on it, a glazed top. You dropped a very sharp needle on it, a diamond needle, and you could cut groove on that 16-inch disc to record programs, 15-minute programs, commercials, half-hour shows, whatever you wanted to do on those discs. So in the very early 50s, discs were being slowly replaced by tape, and that was a phenomenon, to suddenly have a tape recorder in your hands that you not only could record on, but you could also go back and edit. Because if you dropped the needle on a 16-inch disc and cut a groove, it was there. You couldn't change anything unless you did a dub of the whole thing. But with tape, it was just amazing. And the first tape that was used for recording purposes for audio was actually paper. Had little thin strands of metal in it. And I remember the first tape recorders we had a Brush Sound Mirror was the product line. Concert Tone was another one. We ended up with this Concert Tone flat tape machine that somehow we got in the radio station where I was working at the time at KVVC in Ventura, California. And but you had to be very careful with it when you started it or stopped the tape because it had a tendency to cut the tape. So you'd start the machine to play the tape and it'd cut right through it. So you had to stop and splice it together. And but that was a big step forward. And then eventually cartridge tapes came along, so you could record commercials for 60 seconds or 30 seconds or 5 minutes or half an hour programming and just slip them into a cart. You didn't have to rewind the tape and that type of thing. So those were all progress things that were made. Yeah. But I loved radio. It was fun. We usually had a station, small stations where I worked, where we had maybe 15 or 20 people, not only the air staff, but the salespeople, the front office, the managing. Usually you had a chief engineer that maintained the transmitter and the microphones and the studios and that type of thing. Yeah.
What was day one like when you walked in? Your first broadcasting job, was this in high school or?
I was still in high school at the time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, your first, I would say that's professional, but your first maybe paying job or your first radio station?
Well, I'll tell you, the first radio station I worked for in Santa Paula was under, at that time, KSPA was under, what's the word I'm looking for? Bankruptcy. That's the word I'm looking for. And so I would.
Check was kind of small.
Yeah,
then,
the only way I could get paid and get enough money to buy gasoline to drive from Ojai to Santa Paula was to go to my sponsors, and I had a few sponsors in Ojai, maybe 5 or 6 of them. I go around once a week, and I was selling spots for $1 a piece. And I would say, okay, give me 80 cents for the radio station and give me 20 cents for my commission. So I can buy, because if I gave it to the radio station, the whole $1, I'd never get it back because the bankruptcy people were waiting to get the money. And so that's how I got maybe $1 or $2 to buy gasoline when it was 17 cents a gallon. Yeah.
We got to take a break here in just a second, Jim. But do you remember that first day? What if you have to think back of that day, walking through the doors, going, I made it. I'm broadcasting, or I'm now
sitting down at a console for
station.
The first time. I'll tell you right now, sitting down for the first time with a microphone in front of you and a mic switch, and opening it up and saying something, you're a nervous wreck. And I was playing records, 78 RPM records, and I was afraid, scared out of my wits. And also you're like a little kid, what do I do now? And then after you do it for a few hours, you get a little more confident, First full-time job I ever had, a fellow by the name of Bob Miller was on at night. I came in to do the night shift in a radio station up to midnight. He said, Jim, there's the audio board. There's the stack of records over there. He said, I'm going to the movies. I'll be gone for 3.5 hours. He said, by the time I get back, you'll know how to run the console. You'll know how to run the queue up records. You'll know how to do everything because you're going to make all kinds of mistakes between now and midnight when I come back. And by the time he came back 3.5, 4 hours later, I knew what the heck I was doing.
Yeah.
And today I'm still not too sure I know what I'm doing.
Well, I'm glad. It makes me feel a little bit better that you were nervous that first day. I remember my first day on a Dr. D. I remember I stood, I couldn't sit down, and I was so nervous. The first day, and we record, so I sat in for John Hennigan on a live show one time, and Mark, who's down the hall right now producing a show, Mark was the engineer on that show, sound engineer. And then when he said, "You're live," and he points at me, there was probably 30 seconds of dead air.
Yeah.
My mind went blank.
Yeah, what does
I'm
he
like,
mean
I'm
by that?
live
I'm
now?
live, yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
like, oh no. Yeah, so that's makes me feel a little bit better that you were
Sure, yeah.
nervous back then as well. My very special guest today on the show is Big Jim Williams, legendary broadcaster here in California, and it sounds like globally as well, with his shows that he's produced over the years for NPR and many different radio stations. He is the author of the Jake Silverhorn Texas Ranger series. He is published by DS Productions, featuring his novels Border Justice, Texas Justice, Seeking Justice, and the 2022 release Gallows Justice. These are all available on Amazon as well as many other books. And Jim's Cattle Drive, his initial Western book, won the Western Fictioneer's 2010 Best First Novel Award. I have to start there. He welcomes emails online at bigjimwilliams2@cox.net. A few of the readers have commented about Big Jim's writings, and I like this one. He knows how to spin a yarn. He keeps me flipping pages. Good action, interesting characters. You can find all his books on Amazon. We'll be right back.
All right, we're clear.
Yeah, that's great. How much time are we in now? You've used quite a bit, haven't you?
22 minutes.
You're in so deep, it's just, it's.
Yeah, you
Oh, I
can't
know.
leave now. You can't leave now. You're in.
No, but we must have used at least 20 minutes, if not more, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, we've done 20 already.
Yeah, I do my first commercial at 20
Oh, that's
rather than at 7, which it used to be. So like we can really kind of get everybody pulled in.
Vote for
Hopefully, and then-
the size of a
And then I
pack.
do radio theater,
2
longer commercials.
Well,
at
I
the
heard
end. The voice.
You mentioned KDKA Pittsburgh.
Then I see him at the.
A friend of mine who worked here in
Seems
town,
to be
as a matter of fact, was an announcer there,
Mhm.
going way, way back. And
Sit down.
I don't think either one of you knew him, but he had a great
Gallows
set of pipes.
Justice.
His name was
These are-
Ted Gates. And Ted worked over at KTMS for a long time, and then he worked at
We'll be right back.
KMUZ, which is now Cruise.
Mhm.
And but he had a wonderful voice, and he had been at KMPC in Los Angeles too prior to that. But he had worked at KDKA in Pittsburgh, which is the granddaddy of them all.
I hear
And,
him
yeah,
before I see
yeah.
him.
It's amazing.
You met a lot of great broadcasters, I'm sure, over the years.
Oh yeah.
It's
remember
really I think it's an art
Pardon?
form. It's an art form in a way.
Oh yeah,
right? It's
sure
like-
it is. Yeah.
Do you remember your first chief engineer?
Yes.
I remember the name of mine, and it's actually of the first commercial station I worked for. And his name, I'll never forget it. Everett Fruitman.
Oh, Fruitman.
Fruitman.
Oh, Fruitman.
Yeah. He took me up to what is Broadcast Peak in Phoenix, which is South Mountain,
Yeah.
to the TV transmitter. So there was some radio, but mostly TV. Took me inside one of the transmitter buildings. And this particular transmitter had been built into a concrete enclosure with a giant plexiglass cover with holes in it for ventilation. And there was tubes, right? And he said, "Watch this." Grabbed a fluorescent bulb from the
Oh,
floor
yeah,
across the
yeah.
line, put it up against the plexiglass, and it
Yeah.
illuminated.
Yeah.
He says, "That is how much energy is coming out of this."
That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that energy that's coming out, that's illuminating the bulb,
Yeah.
is, in a manner of speaking, going to waste. You know, I mean, it's just dissipating into the air, as it were. You know, it's not going anywhere where you could use it for anything per se, unless you wanted to use it to illuminate the fluorescent bulbs. But that was probably the craziest thing I'd ever seen. The thing I liked about it, by comparison to going, if you've been up the Broadcast Peak, you've been up Broadcast. I hated it going up Broadcast Peak because it's like a single lane when you're going up the windy road. Les and I went up in his car, and as he's driving up, of course, I'm up against the mountain. As we're coming down, I'm looking down the side of the mountain because the road is that narrow. I'm going, oh God, Les.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas it was paved all the way up to the top of South Mountain. So, but I still remember about my very first
Chief engineer.
Chief engineer, yeah.
Can
Okay,
can I
I'm ready
check
for the
that
next
out
one.
To see how
I had
the
just-
book cover looks.
Oh,
I just put a new book cover up.
let's take a look. That isn't it. We'll go to the next one. There it is. Oh, nice.
Big Jim Williams.
I like it. Yeah.
Jubal Beckman. Jubal, is that how I say it?
Yeah, Jubal. Beckman.
Jubal
Yeah.
Beckman Mountain Man.
All right, I'm ready, Doctor. Let's do it. Let's
I'm
keep
working
going.
on mine right now.
You know, he's a black mountain man. I wanted the word black in the title, just among the three of us here, and the editor, the publisher, didn't want it.
Oh, wow. Oh.
And I wish I'd have been able to put the word slave in there, or ex-slave, or escape slave,
Yeah.
or something,
Mm-hmm.
which would have been a better
Just to give
gimmick,
it
I
the-
think,
yeah.
a
Give it a little
grabber.
more, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Jeremiah Show. Our very special guest today is Big. Big Jim. Big Jim Williams. Very legendary broadcaster here, and such an honor to have you on the show. It's an art form that I love, or it's a medium that I love. I've loved all my life, and Big Jim is a voice that I've heard all my life, and I've never met him face to face. And we bumped into each other here at the station a few days ago, and here he is now sitting in front of me, and we're getting to know each other. And maybe you've listened to him and heard his voice for all these years, but have not had an opportunity to learn a little bit about Big Jim Williams. Looking at his, and you're looking at it too if you're on the YouTube channel right now, looking at his new book, Jubal Beckman, Mountain Man. Do you want to retitle that on this show? You have that opportunity.
Well, when I first wrote the book, the title I had for it originally was Jubal Beckman, Black Mountain Man, because he's an ex-slave, and the publisher shot that down.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't know the stories of that. I was reading the jacket, and
Yeah.
I was reading a little bit about it. There were a lot of escaped slaves that
There were a few of them
They
that
were mountain
were
men.
on the frontier as mountain men,
Mhm.
yes, men and women. Not too many women, but men, and some were free black men, and some were escaped slaves, which is interesting. And one of the real people was a guy by the name of James Beckworth, who was a former slave, and he came to the frontier, lived there for many, many years, was a great hunter, married a local Cree Indian woman, actually became so associated with the Indian tribes, the Cree Indians, that eventually he actually became what you might call a chief or leader in one of the tribes, and lived out his life on the frontier of America. Yeah, it's an interesting. Of course,
why did
the mountain.
that subject matter? Why did this character speak
Well,
to you?
I
Why
sort of
did you
used
wanna
him
tell
as
the
a
story?
maybe a shadow or something, but it's not a biography or autobiography in that sense of the word. But I just wanted to point that out because there were such people,
Yeah,
and
interesting. I think it's a
but I wish I'd have been able to use the word maybe escaped slave or something of that nature in the title of the book. Yeah,
just to really give the person who picked it up
yeah,
a real
yeah,
good, clear
yeah. Get a
description
better concept.
of what the story. I think it's a fascinating story, and yeah, definitely pick a copy up. It's Big Jim Williams, Jubal Beckman, Mountain Man. I wanted to go back before we get into the writing.
Sure.
The writing career is incredible, and so many. You said 10 novels now. 10,
I have 10 books out. Yeah.
10 books, yeah. Let's go back to the broadcasting and if we could a little bit, because you've been a broadcaster since 1949.
Right.
You've seen so much that has happened in some of these milestones, monumental life, events. You were there as a broadcaster. when I listen to radio broadcasters from those days, much as movie picture actors, what they were called then, right? The dialect, the pronunciation was much different then, and broadcasting, how people actually speak, or how people actually speak now. Maybe they spoke the same way then, but the broadcasting, there was definitely a way that the spoken word was communicated. Did you have, as a young broadcaster, Jim, was it a challenge for you to switch between how you learned to communicate in your day-to-day life and then how you communicated as a radio broadcaster? Was there a switch? Do you know what I mean? Some of those, the dialect was so almost like theaters, like somebody was on stage.
Well, there is a little more projection, I believe, when you're on the air using your voice right now, for example, than regular casual conversation. But I ended up basically doing a lot of morning radio, and I didn't use the word Big Jim Williams, by the way. I called myself the unshaven one because I didn't shave in the morning. I got up and too soon to, so I got in there. Called myself the Scourge of Sycamore Canyon, too. So these were nicknames that I had for myself. And I did a program called Wake Up with Williams. My nephew, who's on this radio station right now, Mike Williams, is Mike in the Morning. And we are related. I'm his uncle. He's my nephew.
I didn't
but
put
yeah,
the two and two together.
Yeah, but I did morning radio for years as simply Jim Williams and the old unshaven one. And every once in a while, somebody actually will recognize my voice. I was in the Ronald Reagan Museum a year or two ago, and this woman stepped up and she saw my name tag and she said, "You're the one I used to listen to on the radio when I was a kid." And I said, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate being recognized. And she said, yeah, when I was a kid, my mother and I used to listen to you every morning on KDB. And she said, and then I asked her, I said, what are you doing now? And she said, I'm retired. So that gives me an idea how long ago that was. I was on KDB from 59 to 69 before I went to Santa Barbara City College. But there is, I think there is a certain projection you put into your voice when you're actually doing broadcasting. But today, radio is far more casual today than it used to be. Mm-hmm. I think the auditions, when I first got into the business, you had to have a deep voice. That was your pronunciation had to be very clear, had to be precise. It usually followed the NBC handbook. NBC actually published a book, a dictionary on the pronunciation of words, not the pronunciation of words, but the pronunciation of words. That were in that special book, and I still have an old copy of it tucked away someplace. Yeah,
I would have never made it. I mumble.
But radio today is very casual. There weren't very many women during DJ shows or news or things of that nature in that period of time, but they are now. Sure. Yeah.
You were a news stringer. This was a new term to me. What is a news stringer?
Well, I lucked out. I was at Santa Barbara City College as the public information officer for 23 years. And one day I looked up and this guy walks through the front door carrying a Nagra tape machine. Those things sell for about $2,000 to $4,000 a piece. And he had a microphone with the windscreen on it, and it said VOA on it. And I just happened to see him walk in the front door, and he was there to interview one of our staff members for a program. And I walked over and introduced myself and said I was a former broadcaster. Who are you? And he told me, and he had worked in old-time radio as a producer doing some of the big shows. And when radio started to fade, network radio, he got a job with the Voice of America, which is a shortwave instrument the United States uses to tell its story overseas. So when he got through with his interview on campus, I said, please come by my office. I want to talk to you. And so we talked for a long time, a very nice guy. And then a couple of weeks later, I get a call from Voice of America in Los Angeles. They had a bureau down there on Wilshire Boulevard. Would I be interested in doing some coverage for them in the Tri-Counties? I said, oh, hey, I would love that. So I started interviewing people for them. People over at the Study for Democratic Institutions. I did a lot of stuff there. I interviewed Lotta Lehman, former opera singer who lived in Santa Barbara. She was from Germany originally. Mahinder Singh Gill, who was a triple jump artist, Olympic champion, who was training at San Luis Obispo, on and off. But the big thing was we had a murder trial in Santa Barbara when a fellow by the name of Yorgan Yanikian, an Armenian, lured two Greek officials Turkish officials, excuse me, to the Biltmore Hotel in Santa Barbara and murdered both of them in retaliation for the 101.5 million Armenians who were killed by the Turks. And so they had a trial here in Santa Barbara, put Mr. Yanikian on trial, and I was asked to cover that for Voice of America and did. And so I would go to the trial periodically, cover it, and I was there when the final decision was reached, went out to the pay phone, called the results into VOA back in Washington, D.C., and then they put those results on the air and broadcast them around the world. I also did interviews with Burl Ives, for example, and his music. Sat down and did an hour-long interview with him. Then he sent the tape off to VOA as a stringer for VOA, Voice of America. And then they did the editing on it. You guys can do the editing on this program, cut it down to what they wanted, transferred it into a variety of languages, and then aired it around the world by shortwave. Yeah. And that was fun. I did that for a long, long time. I wanted to work for him. I actually applied for a job and even flew back to Washington to be interviewed and that type of thing. I didn't get the position I wanted, but I would love to have worked for them. They have bureaus all around the world too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you did quite a bit of work.
Yeah, it was
for
fun.
them.
It was fun. I recommend it. Yeah.
Every day is a new day, and there's a lot of great stories out there that you've told.
I'm a news
that you've been
junkie too. I
involved
love
in.
the news. I follow everything all the time. Yeah.
Well, you're also a terrific writer. Let me tell you about mountain men. Mountain men roamed America's unexplored West, trapping beaver from about 1820 to 1840. This breed of rugged men, including a scattering of escaped and freed black slaves, with their buckskins and long rifles, faced hostile Indians, wild animals, hunger, and death, hundreds of miles from families and civilization. They hunted in fur companies or as free trappers, working alone in the rugged Rocky Mountains, relying on their cunning and skills to survive starvation, buffalo stampedes, blizzards, and endless Indian battles in their quest for beaver pelts. This is a novel, Mountain Men, of fiction featuring Black mountain man Jubal Beckman, who is a young man escaped as a slave, and he flees into America's unmapped wilderness to avoid slave catchers and become a free trapper. And such men really lived. Deadly conflicts and adventures follow, from knife fights to battles with Indians, with bears, blizzards, and nature. Beckman loves to sing, to dance, to make love and drink, and tell outlandish tales during the annual rendezvous that brought mountain men, whiskey traders, and peaceful Indians together to compete, gamble, dance, play music, and swap stories, yarns, and lies. His goal is to earn money to free his Mama Glow and family from slavery. He hunts with a big dog. He falls in love with a Cree Indian woman, and he fights as a Union soldier during the U.S. Civil War. It's historical fiction and action all rolled into one. And it's Big Jim Williams' latest book, Jubal Beckman, Mountain Man. And you can find it on Amazon. We'll be right back. Okay, I got to plug my battery in, darn it.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry. Now, you've got a power strip right in front of Big Jim.
Okay, cool.
So you don't have far to go.
Nice and easy.
Yes, indeed.
I was going to make it today, but
Hey.
we just got, what do we got, two?
Uh-huh.
And we'll be right back.
I want to talk candy.
By the way, I can tie in your name here with Jeremiah Johnson here in a minute.
Okay.
No, really? Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Kennedy? We want to come back and talk about
Yeah,
it?
I do want
And
to,
then
but I'll
move on
mention,
from broadcasting.
yeah, I'll mention
Whenever
this
you're ready.
because it's been do you realize it's been 50 years since Jeremiah Johnson
No
was
way.
made?
Really?
Welcome back to
That
the
movie?
Jeremiah.
My dad's
Great
favorite
film.
movie, Robert
Welcome back to the
Redford.
Jeremiah
50
Show. Our
years.
very
Yeah,
special
yeah.
guest
Today
And that
is-
starred
it was Robert Redford.
Robert Redford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me
Great
put up,
movie.
Let me put up another book Jim, what would you like? I got all your book covers here. Which one should do you want to put up since you advertise it? Escape West? Or which would you rather what should I put up on the
I
screen?
would put this one back. Can you put that back
Sure,
up, or is it
keep it
too
up.
soon?
No. I can keep it up
Okay.
the whole time. Whatever you want.
I don't think we can really talk about the assassination of Kennedy. It's too soon. It's just too soon.
Richard.
That's been 59 years. Can you
Richard.
We
believe
can't even
that?
talk about Lincoln.
Yeah.
Although I have to say that it was a joke that was told in an intention of good taste, but it was a bad taste of a joke. Eloy told on the Commerce Program Wednesday, basically saying, it was actually a week ago. He says, that this guy was running for president, and or Biden was running for president, and was president, and he was able to communicate with the presidents of the past. So he goes to George Washington. He says, what can I do to be a better president? And he gives him some advice, tell the truth, And then he goes to, John Adams or Jefferson, what have you.
Yeah.
He says, what can I do to be a better president? And he says, well, be humble, be humble. Then he goes to Lincoln and says, how can I be a better president? And Lincoln says, go see a play. And there was reaction via email from a couple of people who felt that it was in bad taste.
I can believe that. Yes.
It's really unfortunate that we have that kind of attitude. Anyway, whenever you're ready, Jeremiah, I am.
Okay.
And this is, we have one more break to give.
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Jeremiah Show. I am sitting here in studio with a legendary radio broadcaster, television broadcaster, writer, Big Jim Williams. Big Jim Williams, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me back here, Jeremiah. I wanted to mention, too, in respect to my book, Jubal Beckman, Mountain Man, that Jeremiah, your name, also fits into Jeremiah Johnson, the great motion picture that starred Robert Redford. Can you believe that movie is now 50 years old?
No, I cannot actually.
I just got a copy of my Western magazine I subscribe to called True West, and they've got a wonderful feature in there. And Pollock, who directed the film, also the Pollock Theater out at UCSB, is that connection.
Sidney Pollock? Was it?
Yeah. And but Jeremiah Johnson, from the standpoint of a great mountain man movie, is fantastic. I recommend go see it again.
Yeah, that was my dad's favorite. I've seen it many times. I can't believe it's 50 years here.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Well, speaking of a long time ago, but it feels it's still, as Dr. D just said a few moments ago, it's still pretty close to all of us. You were on air when John Kennedy was shot.
On November 23rd, 1963, I was doing the morning over at KDB Radio, 1490 on the dial AM, and along about 10 o'clock, 10:30, something like that. I was playing music, went down the hall to an Associated Press teletype, looked down, and there was one little headline that said, Dallas, Texas, Kennedy shot. That's all it said. Dallas, Texas, Kennedy shot. And I went back and I put it on the air. And then the teletype started spewing out all of this information. And our newsman came in, Vic Fergie, and the two of us were alternating, going back and forth, reading the latest bulletins coming out. And the first reaction for all of us, of course, was that President Kennedy had been wounded, that, he's going to be okay. That was what we all hoped for. But then within about an hour or so, it was very obvious that he was dead. And then when Walter Cronkite came on and announced on television on CBS that the President of the United States had been assassinated, that was terrible. Some of the side effects of that period of time, I don't think people are aware of. Television, radio, and TV went blank for 3 days. Virtually all radio stations in the United States and television stopped running commercials. I don't think most people know that. But they went to playing somber music. They went to doing news. excuse me. It was a terrible time in America. People were extremely sad. I took a reel-to-reel tape machine, went down on State Street on the corner of Anapamu and State where the old Pelchin Sun used to be, and set it up and did a Man on the Street program. I wish I still had that tape, but I had a house fire in 1977 that took care of things like that. But interviewing people on the street and got their opinions and went back and put it on the air.
What were
Yeah.
some of the things that people were telling you?
Excuse me here. I've got the remainder from a cough and for a remainder from a cold, rather. People were sad, and everybody remembers exactly where they were on that date of November 23rd, 1963, when Kennedy was assassinated, as they remember where they were on 9/11 when the planes crashed into the big towers in New York. But people were sad. People were crying. It was unbelievable. This very young president who was assassinated, and then later on, his brother, who was also assassinated.
Jim, you want to get some water? Do you need more water? Pause.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. Do you need some more water?
No, it was a terrible time in America, and one that we should refer to, go back and think about. And one of the things I did the next day after the assassination, it dawned on me that we had been getting all of these items from the Associated Press, including a picture of Kennedy that had been typed out, and also a picture of Abraham Lincoln that had been typed out using the letters of the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
And we had thrown all of those in the trash. I went back through the trash and pulled out all of those documents, all of those bulletins dealing with the assassination, and stuffed them in a paper bag. I got them all, except I could never find the initial one that said Dallas, Texas, president shot. Never could find it. But I saved all of those, put them in a paper bag, and kept them at home. But there again, that fire in '77 took care of that, unfortunately. Yeah.
The great Jim Williams, broadcaster, writer, he's with us this hour. Jim loves to hear from you, so you can email him at bigjimwilliams and the number 2 at cox.net. We'll be right back.
Very good.
Okay,
Sorry
so
about that.
no, it's are you feeling you need more water? I can go get
No,
some
I
more.
still got the water here.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just that.
Well, we got what segment?
One segment left.
Yeah, that's I get that right now too. It's like an itchy. It's like stuck in your lung. Welcome back.
Well, I've had this
Hard to-
bloody
went back
cold
and
now
put it
for
on the
over a
air.
month. The
Yeah,
cold is
later
gone.
on,
It's just the
His
cough.
brother, who was also.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a lozenge. You want a lozenge?
Well, I've got
assassinated.
You got a
I've
couple?
got some of these
Also
assassinated.
Butterscotch.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's my
Also
favorite. Here, I'll give you a
assassinated.
couple. These are
One of the
right
many-
out of the package.
One of the
should,
many benefits here. Yeah.
we can
Refer to,
we
go
can
back,
cut out your
think
cough,
about.
can't we?
And
All
so
right.
are we doing another spot?
We're
Those are
doing
all
one
taken care
last
of.
segment.
Brother,
This is
who was
writing.
also
So what I'm going to do,
assassinated.
because we don't have a lot of time, because we did the 3 commercials, so that says quite a bit.
One that
about
we
the books.
should
And what I
refer
was
to,
thinking
go
about
back,
was
think
just
about.
coming back and talking about, you retired, and then you've been writing since what is it, 90? Is it
I started in
92?
1984.
84. Well, yeah, that's when you started writing. That's what it says here. But you started. When did you start? Like you retired 19. I have it here somewhere. 95.
I retired in
I'm reading
92.
half of it because
Yeah.
I got the screen.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the writing and then
Okay.
and the westerns and why you that kind of thing. We got about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, coughs are the worst,
Yeah.
especially when you're trying to talk. Thank you, Jim. We're
Ready?
almost finished.
That's right. Ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Jeremiah Show here with Big Jim Williams. And we're talking about his broadcasting career. But what you may not know is that Big Jim is a fantastic writer, really specializing, I think it's fair to say, and you really love the Western genre.
But I have written, and I've written 3 ghost stories, for example. I like writing ghost stories for Suspense Magazine.
Mm.
Those are fun to do. I've written a lot of just short stories dealing with general subjects. And I've written a lot of comedy pieces dealing with the frontier of America and the gold mining areas of California and Virginia. Those are fun to do too. And then I've written a radio play, Close Encounters of the Confederate Kind, that was aired, we mentioned earlier on. But the Western genre is something I've slipped into, and I enjoyed it. Currently, I'm working in a book that's totally different than anything I've ever done. It's a modern crime novel, and dealing with the cartel, and a guy who finds a lot of money that belongs to the cartel and wants to keep it. And that leads to a lot of drama. So
Yeah,
I'm having a lot of fun with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a great novel. Do you have a title yet, or
I'm sorry?
do you have a title yet, or
No, I do not.
We
No.
want to tease that. You'll have to come back.
I have written quite a bit of nonfiction too. I prefer to write fiction, but for example, I did a series of articles in the Goleta paper when it existed. Including an article dealing with this last stagecoach driver over San Marcos Pass, going over to the Santa Ynez Valley. That was an 8-hour drive, led by 6 horses. And that was fun to do too. And some other pieces dealing with the Marine Corps Air Base and things of that nature. Yeah.
Why are you drawn to Westerns? You grew up here in Ojai and on the Central Coast, Santa Barbara, and I know there's a great Western history. For instance, I was on State Street and I saw a plaque the other day that said this is where the Wells Fargo, Express would drop, and they would start over the mountains here, the San Ynez
Correct.
Mountains, and they would come over. It was a whole day trip where the Wells Fargo.
Took them 8 hours, yeah, and they began usually right up about where the Arlington Theater is.
That's where I saw the
Yeah,
plaque.
and it used to be the Arlington Hotel occupied that site.
Ah.
Yeah.
What do you love? Like, what are some of the facts that we may not know that you absolutely love as a writer that intrigue you?
Well, one of them is the fact that when the stagecoach went north toward the Santa Ynez Valley, it went up through Slippery Rock, which is an area that I had a chance to see about a year ago. And Chinese coolies were brought into play. And they, in turn, were able to carve into the sandstone a pathway for the wheels of the carriage to go up, led by the 6 horses. Wow. And stair-stepping, too. Wow. Which is amazing. It's in private land. It's not accessible to everybody, but through a wonderful association, someone who really helped me out. I appreciate it and got a chance to see that. But I love Western history. I think that the people who occupied the American West, the people on the wagon trains, the people who came forward on the stagecoaches that came from across the Mississippi and wanted to come to what would eventually become California, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington. What marvelous people they were, courageous people. The Mormons included, who came west and settled in Utah. These were pioneer people, gutsy people who wanted a better life. And found it that way. And but as they say on the Oregon Trail, there is a burial site about every mile from somebody who died while coming on the Oregon Trail. Yeah.
The stories are probably endless that you could pull. Did you watch the television show? It was 1883 or 1884?
I haven't seen that one,
Oh
no,
my
but
God,
I've
that
seen
is done
some
so well.
other ones, yes, that are
Taylor Sheridan, such a good.
that are
That's
great.
so
Yeah.
great, yeah. It reminded me a little bit of Dancing with Wolves, that style where just good storytelling, great cinematography.
Oh, that's a great book. Yeah, great
Yeah.
book, great movie. Yeah.
Well, if someone was, it's the holidays right now, and great time to buy a book for someone you love or for yourself. Which would, and you had one to buy, was there a book that you would have them start with, Jim, of yours?
Well, as I said, I've written 10 books. I've got 3 collections of short stories out there, and I'm very proud of those. My latest book, of course, is the Jubal Beckman Mountain Man, which covers a black slave who escaped from the South. I've written the books, and I'm very proud of them. I think my first book is one of the best books I ever did, called Cattle Drive, Desperate Cattle Drive, by Big Jim Williams. And also my other book, too, which is a big fat one called Escape West, which has a lot of twists of the tale of people who live on the frontier and cope with all the various elements. And those books I really recommend because I think they're some of the best ones I've done. And but you always think too that the last piece you wrote is the best one.
This one, yeah.
Isn't that true? The last program you did is the best one. Yeah, 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 yeah. The last wife you had was the best one.
My last girlfriend wasn't the best one I ever had. That doesn't work with girlfriends, does it? Big Jim Williams, Big Jim Williams.
Sorry for the cough that I've had today,
well,
too.
I'm going to quit torturing you and making
just getting
you
over this
talk.
cold, yeah, but I've had a wonderful time today.
I had a wonderful time with you as
Yeah,
well.
I could do this forever if the voice would hold out. Yeah,
I could do it with you forever as well, and so many great stories, and lucky for us, you've put out a lot of good stories, so we can read some of your books. You can find them all on Amazon.com. I'm going to try to find the thing that you did with NPR, the Close Encounters of the Confederate Kind. I'm going to try to find that and put it up for the listeners so we can listen to that. I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
It's also available too out of the museum up in Bellingham, Washington. They did a version of it up there too.
What's the museum?
Yeah, it's called the American Museum of Radio and Electricity. And as a matter of fact, when I was there a couple of years ago, they had my radio play on a CD in a rack. And I went over and I pulled 3 of them off and walked over to the guy and I said, by the way, I wrote this and I'd like to buy some copies. And he said, oh, take them, they're yours. But they have their own radio station there, a low-powered FM station where they play old-time radio shows. And then they also produce and record new radio programs, which I find wonderful. And they did mine, Close Encounters of the Confederate Kind, and others as well. So that was fun. That was fun to meet the people that were also involved in the production of that. Yeah.
And we've actually got a lot of listeners up in Bellingham, Washington.
Oh, do you? Good.
Yeah. So, hey, Bellingham.
It's a beautiful area.
Big Jim and I say hello, and Dr. D. Last question. I know this is simple. You probably get asked this all the time, but I would not feel good about not getting this advice from you. What is there something simply that a couple things you could tell broadcasters, someone that wants to be a broadcaster, someone that wants to be the next Jim Williams, what would you say that you've learned over all these years, a couple things that might help them along their way, their path, and find their path in the career?
I think getting a good background in journalism is an excellent thing to do, and a good background in grammar, English. And be willing to move, to start out, go find a job someplace. If it means that you can get a job in Utah, grab it. If it means you can get a job in Wyoming, grab it. If you can get a job locally, so much the better. But I think all of us have worked in various places. I ended up working in New Jersey for a while, and I've worked in San Luis Obispo, Ventura, Santa Barbara, on the East Coast as well as the West Coast, yeah. But put a little adventure in your feet, and don't be afraid to move around and go off and start someplace else, because all of us did. All of us have. Yeah.
Great advice from legendary broadcaster.
Hey, thank you very much
Jim
for
Williams.
having me, Jar. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Communicate, but listen more and evolve. Everybody have a great week.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right.
Thank you.
We're clear.